Thank you, Patsy, and thank you, Tom. Thank you for the warm welcome and the invitation to speak to you all and all the people. I don't know where to wave at the. Hi guys, all the people who are visiting online. This is great. I love speaking to a small number of faces, but reaching a large audience. So if the internet goes down, go tell 10 of your neighbors what I told you today. So Patsy did a great job of introducing some of my background. In the Center for Conservation Research at San Antonio Zoo, we work on all sorts of things that fall directly under that program title, conservation and research. That's all we do. Part of that is outreach education, like what I'm doing tonight, which furthers our conservation and research goals. Every single one of you are valuable partners in us achieving our mission, which I believe is a shared mission to preserve and protect the biodiversity of Texas for present and future generations. I'm stealing from several entities' mission statements when I say that, but I think we could all agree that's a worthy goal, and that's why I'm so happy to work at San Antonio Zoo and to be the director in the Center for Conservation Research, because I feel like we're where the rubber meets the road. Most people don't think about zoos as being first order research organizations. But if you go out and you talk to resource managers, folks in the state and federal agencies, and talk to academics, and they'll tell you, and museums as well, tell you that zoos are an indispensable partner in these efforts. Wasn't always the case. Modern zoos, especially zoos like San Antonio Zoo, they put their money where their mouth is, and they put that in stone, literally, with a program. So a little bit about some of the other things we do. Both the Vice President of Conservation Research, we have a background with reptiles, amphibians, fish, and also cave organisms, cave ecosystems. Myself, I've been caving in Texas since '98 or so, and a lot of my research interests and career steps have involved cave organisms. That continues, and I don't see why it shouldn't. This is perhaps the most famous cave fish in the world. This is the Mexican cave fish. The fish on the surface, the fish at the top of the image is a typical surface form of the Mexican tetra. You can see them in the well area at the San Antonio Zoo. You can see them at San Pedro Springs. You can see them at the Blue Hole when it's flowing, the Kamal River. They've been introduced to this part of Texas. The one on the bottom that's got no pigment, no eyes. Fish that look like that are found in a little over 30 caves in Mexico, where surface fish have been introduced into the subterranean environment, basically swept underground during flooding of rivers, and didn't just die on impact, but survived, thrived, and eventually evolved into these really, really extreme white flying cave fish. The one on the bottom looks like a poor example of a fish, not good at anything. I will say that little blind, dumpy fish that can't swim very well is a great white shark with its ecosystem. And that's true of all the other ones I'm going to talk to you tonight, some more than others. So rather than thinking of them like, oh, it's lost its eyes, it's lost pigment. Eyes are of no use when all they can do is bump nervous tissue into things that you can't see anyways. And pigment's of no use either. These things can be very expensive developmentally for the embryo to produce and during later development. So eventually, in many cases, you'll see when there's a selective advantage, you'll see traits, that frequency of that trait increasing in the population. So not that the cave environment is this extreme environment and we're just fine and dandy. I'm wet below the knees. It was extreme for a little while today. There are these environments that where we live on the surface and underground, they're extremes with respect to one another, right? But for the most part, for any of us in this room, where the things I'm talking about live pretty much as extreme as you could experience. You know, those you need submersible to visit some of these spots. So anyways, a little bit about cavefish. And we actually work with this species at the zoo. We have several projects. We're studying the first steps in the what happens to surface fish when they colonize the subterranean environment. We could do that here. We can't do it in their native range of Mexico because I know that the fish here in San Antonio were introduced in 1908. So I know how long they've been following the water underground every time San Pedro Springs or the Blue Hole runs dry. Kind of cool. And then we have some cave populations as well. So that's really cool where we have this non-native invasive trash fish that provides this unique opportunity to sort of crack open capital E evolutionary biology studies. And in the story of the Mexican cavefish and its origin, you know, that happened at a minimum of 30,000 years ago. That's a lot of sweeps of the waves up and down the beach and wash out those tracks of what were the first steps that these fish took in adapting to the subterranean environment. Was it metabolic? They could go for long periods of time without eating, like that guy on the bottom. Was it that they could gorge when it suddenly rains and there's lots of food and then, you know, not die of insulin coma, like the guy on the bottom? All sorts of interesting things. Turned it off or something?
Hit the button again.
Glad I'm not the only one that can't do it.
There you go. There you go.
All right. So I've set the stage. There are more, well, by the way, that first cavefish I showed you might be familiar because the Mexican cavefish is commonly a domestic strain, is commonly sold in pet stores. You can walk into a local aquarium shop and see them in pet stores. So a lot of people know about that fish. They're also extremely important for both evolutionary biology research and also biomedical research. So I just want to go back to that guy real quick. The cool thing about this system is that we have a normal surface fish and we have this really different cavefish, and researchers will be able to map out their genomes and where the genes that code for many of these traits exist, et cetera, et cetera. And to that end, they'll be able to map out lots of things that relate to the human condition, right? Obviously, degenerative eye disease, metabolic studies, so looking at things like fatty liver disease, diabetes, autism. The cavefish are autistic. If you put them on the spectrum compared to surface fish, they don't school, they ignore each other. Why would you school in a cave? You should school on the surface or a big thing eats you. And so they're really valuable that way. So there's a large field of study in terms of cavefish, but it's almost all that species. Now, if we could ever sort of work out husbandry for some of the other groups of organisms I'm going to talk about tonight, they'd be a lot cooler. Okay, so I give you a big. This is a Mexican blindcat. This is probably the best known of all the North American blind catfishes. Actually, it most certainly is. The species was described in the 1950s from Coahuila, Mexico. I'll show you later. It's known from a little over a dozen sites in Coahuila. And this photo is real nice because these are photos of individuals in life, which might tell you a little bit about some of our experience with these fish. And to give you an idea, though that individual is about 2.5 inches long. So when I talk about like white blind catfish, they're this big. They're also what kind of sharks? Great white sharks. They're great white sharks in their ecosystem. Yeah. You'll see. Okay. So just right off the bat, I put the slide in early, so y'all understand who Satan is. Okay. Satan is that fish on the top. The scientific name for that fish, the widemouth blindcat, is Satan eurystomus. So it's very common in taxonomy, especially with subterranean organisms, that taxonomists will pick names from mythology, and Satan is another mythological name associated with the underworld. We have all sorts of things that refer to Hades and Persephone and all of this from Greek mythology as well. And that's Satan. I figured that's a really catchy title. Probably got 2 or 3 of you in the room. Anyways, if I talked about, say, looking for the toothless blind cat, I might have lost some of you, right? It's just the Satan works a little better. Not that this is toothless blind cat is shown on the bottom, Trogloclanus. You can see these are 2 really different looking catfish. Believe it or not, these fish have been found together in the past. At some sites, these fish can occur. They're really different looking for a bunch of reasons I'm going to explain. But also, I want to point out these are terrible looking fish. I mean, they're not beautiful by most standards, but these are terrible looking specimens compared to the last because these are preserved specimens. That's also part of the story I'm telling you tonight. So if you see something that's really beautiful, it's alive. If you see something that's totally gross, it's preserved. Which one is this? Right. So this is the type specimen for Satan eurystomus. This animal, you can see that's about 2 and 3 inches long tops. They get up to about 5. You can see a few really interesting things about this catfish. One, it's got a huge head on it. Holds that wide mouth. Do you see the little dark dots right along the jawline? Yeah. That's lateral line. So these are electro receptors, and these guys have a really well developed lateral line system. Do you see this in cavefish? And you see this in cave salamanders as well, right? Eyes don't do you any good. Lateral line system's pretty awesome. So that's another thing that you'll see in these guys. Also, look at the extremely attenuated barbels, right? It's a catfish, but it's got some really super duper whiskers. And then, so I mentioned Mexican blind cat is the best known of the bunch. I pointed out real quick the 2 that live under San Antonio. We're still learning new things about these blind catfish, about the salamanders. You'll see. There's all sorts of cool discoveries going on in the recent past and continuing. For example, back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, population of blind cats was discovered in Tamaulipas, right? So not in Coahuila, in the Chihuahuan Desert, but clear over on the other side of the Sierra Madre. These things were coming out really big, deep spring systems in this, that's a tropical environment. And that's a totally different species from the ones in Coahuila. You'll see on this map, I'm not going to try and arrow or anything, that big blue blob that you see is approximately the range of the Mexican blind cat in Mexico. That red star, just to orient you, that's about Del Rio Amistad, right there on the Texas-Mexico border. And then the inset shows, don't pay too much attention, won't be on the quiz later, but the inset shows, that's from Hendrickson et al. 2001, the 36 sites that they surveyed during their expeditions for that study. And you can see it, they looked at 6 sites up there in Texas for some reason, and then a whole bunch of sites in Coahuila. That red dot is actually the type locality, which is very close to Meltor de Musquis. And then you can see a bunch of sampling went on in Tamaulipas that included the discovery of this other species. So, also some of the very first caving I ever did in my life with a purpose was part of this project back in '98, looking at some of the first 6 numbers on that map in Texas. So why on earth were we looking for a Mexican fish in Texas? This is why. So you see the little red squiggly line going through the middle of the map. That's the U.S.-Mexican border. The big green blob is the Edwards Aquifer. So there are portions of the Edwards Aquifer, related aquifer units that are south of the border in Mexico, in northern Coahuila. And they could contribute immensely to the flow of the Rio Grande. We don't know a whole lot more about that, but that big green blob is why we were looking on the Texas side of things. And unfortunately, we don't know much about the nature of the aquifer down there. The Sierra del Burro, which is the largest mountain range in Mexico, it's just not a tall mountain range in Mexico. You all know it because that's where all the storms start when they're coming across from the Pacific, and somewhere southwest of Del Rio, everything turns into a big angry rainbow bullet, and then sometimes it hits us. And they all start in that one spot in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of that big blue blob I showed you. That's the Sierra del Burro. That water is part of what recharges this portion of the aquifer. And keep in mind that that is Chihuahuan Desert. It's a desert. But when you get those huge storms, it becomes, right? The Arroyo Zorro, which is one of the big dry arroyos that feeds into Amistad from the Mexican side. When they have major rain events, there's more water flowing down that one arroyo than the Rio Grande itself.
You don't want to be,
I'm sorry?
you don't want to be camping in that aurora.
No, but it's a nice ranch. Right, and so I showed you the red star on the map. I'm like, yeah, that's Del Rio, that's Amistad. I showed you all those numbers on the map and said we look for blind cats. I showed you this, show you if there's the aquifer there. That's why we were looking for blind cats. That's where we looked. And then once you know it, back in 2015, they were discovered in Texas by a dear friend who's a National Park Service ranger out at, and archaeologist and cave resource manager out at Amistad National Recreation Area. And he encountered fish that led to a flurry of activity. The Mexican blind cat is federally listed as endangered in Mexico and in the US, but they weren't known from the US. And in fact, some colleagues had requested of Fish and Wildlife Service permits in case we ever found them. And the response was, you don't need permits, they don't occur here. Well, first thing we had to do when we reported the discovery was we all had to get permits. You're supposed to get taxon experts to write letters of recommendation, of which there are very few of us, and we were all pretty much in the same room. So paperwork submitted, we're off, on, and away. And we began, it was really interesting because I mentioned some of my first caving work in Texas back in 1998 was looking for this species, right? There are a lot of really great people involved in that work, and I was very fortunate to tag along so early in my caving career. When blind cats were discovered, when we knew what was going on, it was like that scene out of the Blues Brothers where they're getting the band back together, right? Everyone starts to reach out to the other old team members, and wouldn't you know it, everyone's off doing different things, different careers, you know, better than where they were, and we brought the team back together. So we had the all-star team back once we discovered fish in Texas, and so our strategy was we actually came up with I think I have the same information on. We developed the blind cat working group. So this is a very informal. We just wanted to have a cool sticker. So, but also, there are a few reasons for this. One was this is 2016, 2017, and we really wanted a unifying name to put these very diverse efforts that are spread over decades, sort of under one umbrella. And then also, you know, those were challenging political times in terms of relationships between the right and the left side of that logo. So we felt, you know, anything that we could do to sort of, you know, put that in a different perspective. We know that the river sits on top of the aquifer. We know that aquifer organisms can pass from Mexico to the US under the river, under any fence, wall, razor wire. They always have. They've always lived on both sides. Our dabblings on the surface, aside from things that impact the quality and quantity of groundwater in which they survive, are totally inconsequential to these maybe immortal beings. I'm getting ahead of myself. Oh, look, there's so much in here. You see the clouds, there's two flags.
Yes.
And do you see we got Mexican eagle with the snake? And, do you see how the aquifer goes under the river, it connects? And if you spend time out in that part of Valverde County, you'll recognize the mountains in the background. Anyways, really proud of that one. So
I know.
Jack Johnson, the super guy who discovered the fish in 2015. We put a lot of effort into eventually encountering individuals at this site. Again, that involved 2 teams of 2, and we did this for weeks and weeks, you know, like a 2-day or 3-day trip, something like this. 2 teams of 2. We had 2 caves that we were checking. We climb down to these caves, descend to the caves, perforate a sardine can. One guy puts it in the water and watches it for 4 hours while the other guy just hangs out. And then we switch, and we do 8 hours, and then we switch caves the next day, and then the next weekend we do it again. Until we got fish. So we brought 2 individuals back to the zoo in 2016. We took little fin clips, and sure enough, they're 1% divergent from their neighbors in Mexico. So it's all one big happy population. That's really cool when you think about, you know, what are sort of management and conservation opportunities, and also what's the threat like, right? It's not a single point threat, right? So that's good, sort of. And then right before the world paused in March of February of 2020, we discovered a second population at Amistad National Recreation Area with plenty of blindcats. So that was really cool. So we now have 2 sites in the United States, and National Park Service has been very generous. They've been our partners in this effort, and they've also provided funding over several rounds to inventory the cave and karst resources at Amistad to help them with their cave management plan, particularly doing so we're surveying all this, particularly doing bioinventories of these resources with focus on trying to find habitat for blindcats, because this is the ultimate feather in their cap, right? What great partners to have, that they live and breathe for resource management, and they're really hungry for, you know, more things that they can brag about. And nobody else in the United States has blindcats on their park, so that's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome.
When it says individuals were brought, is that how many individuals were found at the cave system? Or just how many you brought back to the system?
Yeah, that's just how many came back to the city.
Found.
Yeah, we observed at the second site, I think we observed at least 4. Yeah. But we're not there trying to collect great numbers. These are simply, we're allowed to collect 3. 3 is, we feel, is a safe number for a healthy population, for us to bring them back to our research population at the zoo, where we're trying to learn more about the biology. Actually, some of the things that we've learned so far, they don't do a whole lot. The individuals that we have from Texas were all juveniles of different sizes, some very small, some a little bit larger. But we have a couple of older individuals from Mexico. I'll talk about that in a moment. And comparing the growth rates of these individuals, the young ones we have at the zoo, who they live in the lap of luxury, right? There is never a 5-year starvation period or catastrophic flooding or anything like that. They get fed by nice people. We estimate on that growth rate is at least 10 to 15 years to maturity, at least. And who's to say it isn't longer in the wild, where these things undergo less than benign conditions at times. So I'll give you an example, not something that we do at the zoo, but a study that a colleague of mine did some years ago when he had a number of Mexican blindcats in the laboratory. We know that these things are adapted for these really long periods of starvation, right? But what's that like for the fish? So he withheld food from a group of fish for up to 44 months. Not a single fish starved to death. They all lost some weight. When you resume feeding, they all gain back their perfectly normal, healthy weight. So think about a fish that lives in a little slow moving meandering stream at the bottom of a 100-meter deep cave somewhere out in the desert. You get the big rainbow bullseye over this area on an El Burro, and all of a sudden it's like that. The opening crash from Land of the Lost, where the family gets washed down the canyon in the big river, right? And they get washed into some little pool where they sit for 4 or 5 years till the next flood event. They can do it. The other thing is the heck do they think about all that time? So I'm going to say again, this is a great white shark of this ecosystem. Nothing bigger or badder, right? And by the way, it's the only cave vertebrate down there. So they've got no predators other than probably larger individuals of their own species. And we know that they can go super long periods of time without food, and they can go forever on very, very little food. It's a constant environment in terms of, it's always dark. It's always the same temperature, and water chemistry is virtually constant, et cetera, et cetera. So, and these fish do this, they sleep, right? They'll lay down, they'll sleep. Sometimes they lay down upside down, it's terrifying. And they'll do this for long periods of time. And I really have to wonder, like, how would they know if they just dozed off for 10 seconds or 10 minutes or 10 weeks? Really, why does it matter to a blind cat? Like, what does it matter if you overslept by a month? Don't we know how old they are? I mean, they do have otoliths, little bones in their skulls, little ear bones that in other fish species, you can serial section those, you can CT scan them, and you can look, or SEM, and you can count the growth rings on these little disc-like bones, just like rings on a tree. Or what they do is sometimes with frogs or salamanders is you can count the rings of growth in like a finger bone. Constant environment, there's no seasons. So you're not tracking seasonal growth rings, right? It's not like, oh, he grew a whole bunch last spring and then didn't grow all winter. No, I mean, so you don't really have growth rings that you could track with years. But I suspect that you could track growth rings with these fantastic catastrophic weather events. And we have a pretty good history of major rainfall events in that region going back for a very, very long period of time. And so there are some collaborators and some of their colleagues are actually working on reapproaching this idea of looking at the otoliths, and then rather than trying to count years of rings, try and line up those rings with major wet periods, et cetera. So, because we don't know anything about them. They might be immortal. Getting back to the good old days, 2016, 2017, it was right after the inauguration. The organization represented by the 3 individuals in hats, or on the right side of the photo, they were on the outs with their boss because of that inaugural numbers count thing. Don't remember? Yeah. The National Park Service reported the size of the inauguration event, and then got like crossways. Anyways, I want to forget it, but that's why those guys are on the right side, and those other folks are all on the left side, because those are our NPS partners. And most of the guys are standing on the right side. They represent basically a Mexican equivalent of National Park Service and Fish and Wildlife Service. And then there's several of us in there, some consultants, myself, Parks and Wildlife, University of Texas. Our friends from NPS couldn't get permission to go to a meeting in Mexico. Our friends from Coahuila could not get permission to go to a meeting in Texas. But if you've ever been to Amistad Dam, there's a big building in the middle of that thing. And the international border goes right through the T in Amistad. It goes right down the middle of that building. And so we had a meeting there. It was really cool, by the way. It's like a bombed villain's lair. So you go up in this thing, and it's floor to ceiling windows like this with these cool blue vertical blinds and the old controllers for the gate. So you look one way, you're looking down off the dam into the river. You look the other way, it's a lake going off. And how great, and it was really, this photo sort of sums it up, but the feeling of Amistad, right, friendship. Between the two groups, and the fact that Lake Amistad is sort of a central focus of this project. And I just felt like that could come at a better time for, you know, working with our Mexican partners. Okay, so what's the problem? Who cares? Why is this fish endangered in Mexico and in the US? Look where it occurs. What do you see there? Nothing. You're looking for something on the map. There's nothing there. It's one of the darkest spots. This is a night photo, right? One of the darkest spots in North America. So what's the big problem? There's some problems. So that aquifer that I talked about, there are incredible demands on it, both from industrial scale agriculture, from industry. Remember, with all the NAFTA fabricas, the maquiladoras and stuff that popped up along the border, those lead to even growing urban areas, and also simultaneously, because of this action, all the little ejidos where they couldn't afford to drill super deep wells with great big pumps on them, right? They got dried out. So the aquifer in a lot of the areas where blindcats are known from has dropped like 30, 40, 50 meters, way out of reach of ejidos, artisanal small farmers, anything like that. It's really only within grasp of industrial scale agriculture. But I'm not going to blame it all on corn. Well, I kind of am actually still blaming it on corn. So just right on the edge of Piedras Negras, just south of town, is an area called Nava, and the largest, I don't think it's the largest one anymore. It's like second largest, but when it was built, it was the largest brewery in the world. This is Modelo beer. Yeah, 100% of their beer goes to the U.S. market. So none of that's for Mexican consumption. It's all for us. They got a pipeline to their bottling plant. Why did they put this huge brewery there? If you've been there, right? Like, that seems like a weird place to put it. Because as the engineers were saying, or the company folks were saying in their PR, that they located there because they were situated upon an inexhaustible supply of clean water. Right. So I hear things like that, and I think about aster pigeons and American bison. Whenever someone says inexhaustible supply, there's only one thing on Earth that I can think of that exists in inexhaustible supply. And it's not a natural resource. Right. So big black spot on the map. These things really shouldn't be in any trouble at all, but there's a bunch of real obvious reasons why they are. So I already mentioned that fortunately the species is protected in both the US and Mexico. We do know that, and this whole thing about recognizing that the Edwards Aquifer exists on both sides of the Rio Grande, it's actually fairly recent. And now the acknowledgement that this needs to be jointly managed is even more recent, okay? And then, you know, it's really fortunate that the Texas blindcat populations are on Amistad National Recreation Area. These guys bleed stewardship. Like it's in their DNA. We don't have to worry about it becoming Walmart or something like that. Okay, so we know what the big green blob is. I want to talk about the far eastern edge of that big green blob, okay? Recognize it? It's that big glowy thing on the map. So to situate you, I'm not even going to try the laser pointer. Yeah. The big black spot, and then the little glowy spot up there is Del Rio and Ciudad Acuña, and the next one down is Piedras Negras, right? That huge blob in the middle, that's where we are right now. And then under the rosette for my map there in the corner, that's all the corridor going up to Austin. I don't need to show you what Austin looks like at night. It's a little bit like that. So I'm going to talk about the brightest spot on the map. Right, so I already introduced these two. I mentioned that the Mexican blindcat, so they're known from wells, they're known from norias, they've been washed out of springs. They're most of the sites where we can still find them in Coahuila are in very deep caves, like we're talking couple 100 feet or more usually. And but they live in little cave lakes and streams and things like that. These guys, the two under San Antonio, they live in the deep aquifer. Look at that number, 700 to 1,400 feet deep. Really deep. Notice the dates on the description of these things, right? You can imagine as soon as the biological community became aware of their existence, they got described. I mean, what an easy thing to describe. There's nothing like it, and it's super darn cool. But it wasn't until 1919 and 1937 that they were discovered or described. So not discovered until fairly recently before that. That's telling you when we started to put in big old hunkin' wells, right? Because there weren't 700 or 1,000-foot wells around here before that. And in fact, prior to World War II, they were very, very few and far between. Post-war, when we saw the rise of industrial agriculture and everything else, we saw big wells come in. That's when we also had the drought of record and the combination of over pumping in the 1940s and 50s and the drought of record really taught a lot of us something, right? That it's not an inexhaustible resource, not by a mile. Okay, oh wait, so they're all ugly, they're all white, none of them have eyes, they're all this big. How do you know they're different? Well, we have, fortunately, catfish relationships are really well understood. They've been really well studied. There's lots and lots of fossil evidence and molecular and morphological data that's been applied. So we have a pretty good understanding of the phylogenetic relationships of the major groups of catfish in North America. And there's a lot going on this slide. It's all going to be on the quiz. But suffice to say, you're looking at the sort of the earliest genus of catfish we have in North America is mad toms, and then Pylodictis, so that's a flathead catfish, right? The blue tree there is basically a phylogenetic tree there. Pylodictis and Satan appears to be most closely related to Pylodictis based on its skeletal morphology, right? So that big, huge head kind of makes sense. You start to think, is that like a little flathead? Kind of starts to make a little bit of sense. Gain on over to Ictalurus. So Ictalurus is like your blue cats, your channel cats, the fish you eat on Friday. That group of catfish, the Priatella, the blind cats that are down in Tamaulipas, they're most closely related to them. Oh, and I forget to mention. So I said we don't know anything about these. We keep learning new ones. So Dean Hendrickson, who's working on this and my collaborator on this project, he pulled a bunch of the old frozen specimens out that they had collected in Mexico, but just immediately flash froze for genetics. And then he thought later, well, I should get at these and, measure them and look at all this. And he realized that he had two species in the sample. So there's Priatella lundbergi, this thing down on sort of the Sierra Madre Oriental, and then this other thing that's not Priatella lundbergi. And in fact, we think it's they think it's a new genus altogether, not a Priatella. And also Priatella lundbergi also isn't a Priatella, but maybe my next talk I'll explain it. And so going all the way over, when you look at sort of so again to Amurus, which those are like your yellow bullheads and those, pretty common catfish that we have here. Their closest relative is Priatella triatophila, the Mexican blind cat, and this toothless blind cat. So you can see with the exception of the Mexican blind cat and potentially the toothless blind cat, none of these things are really closely related to each other at all. Oh, and I say nothing there is closely related to each other. You can look at the blindcat lineages have been evolving here underground in North America, right, for something like 50 plus million years. And just a little fun number there, you know, that's about 70 times longer than we've been diverging from Neanderthals. So we're talking about a long time. How could they be doing this for so long? It's an incredibly stable environment. It's a super, super stable environment. It's been like that for a very long time. And we should hope there's no reason why it shouldn't be like that for a very long time to come. Okay, why do I have all these terrible photos of the main topics of this presentation? Because we don't have material. So this is a list that shows all of the specimens in museum collections anywhere, and when they were collected, and then what preservation method was used. So back in the day, before we did genetics, specimens were preserved in formalin. It's a very good fixative. Unfortunately, it breaks up DNA. It makes DNA so you only get little tiny fragments out of it. Really cutting edge techniques are being applied to be able to extract DNA and reassemble sensible DNA from really old preserved, formalin preserved specimens. Some folks are trying that with some of the critters I'm talking about tonight, but we don't have any success yet. So we don't have a genetic material for Satan. We do have genetic material for Troglodytes, for the toothless blindcat, and we do have genetic material, obviously, for the Mexican blindcat. I'm going to change gears a little bit. I'm going to loop back in. I'm just bringing in the other part of the story here. My first love underground. Actually, I met my wife underground. My first love underground, though, were these guys. So aquifer adapted salamanders. I've been working on Texas groundwater salamanders for about over 25 years. And these are just fascinating organisms. All the cool things I told you about blind cats, right? Wow. Blind, white, great white sharks, live a long time, don't breed a lot, all that. These guys do it too. Different part of the aquifer, right? So these are much shallower. I think the deepest record of a typical of a salamander like this is under 300 feet, and it might be that individual actually at the very bottom. That guy. So I said we're discovering new things about blind cats all the time. So that salamander in the middle, the Texas blind salamander, it's the most famous salamander in the world. It was described in 1896. It was put on the predecessor of the Endangered Species Act, which was signed into law in 1973 by President Richard M. Nixon. So, you know, it's been around for a long time. I always mention Nixon because people think the endangered species are a party issue, and they're certainly not. And then that salamander at the top, the Austin blind salamander, by the way, the type locality is Barton Springs. How many million people a year visit Barton Springs? That species was described in 2001. That thing on the bottom, we discovered the first specimens in 2005 and working on the description still. This is cool, though. The first two individuals that I ever observed in the wild were in a bottle trap that I set 254 feet deep in a well in a bowling alley parking lot. True story. It's super cool to think that when I was an undergrad and a graduate student, I'd save all my money and fly up to South America and bushwhack my way up some jungle covered volcano, you know, to describe new species of frogs. And now, I mean, that was cool, but to find new species of vertebrates in urbanized, this is in New Braunfels, urbanized areas is pretty cool. So I love the fact that it came out of a bowling alley parking lot. And those of you who appreciate hill country culture will also appreciate the fact that it was a 9-pin bowling alley parking lot. Okay? True Texas. So we're still learning new things about these really fascinating animals. I share these stories because I think it's amazing that we live in a city like San Antonio. We're still discovering new species around us. So, you know, it's not a write-off. And if any of you have ever seen the bumper stickers that we made for the Texas Horned Lizard Reintroduction Project, I know you guys have, right? But why did I make bumper stickers? Because I commute on I-35 and 410 and 281. And I'm just like all those other people. I look left, I see a strip mall. I look right, I see a high density something. I could be in Ohio. I could be in Florida. I could be in California. I could be anywhere. What's special about this place? Well, 254 feet underground, there's new species, right? This is the first specimens were discovered at 3 different sites, all the same season of the same year. Never seen before. It's not like we're the first people ever to walk this land. It's truly amazing. And so part of the main reason for making the horned lizard bumper stickers was to show people that there are bright spots out there, not just the sun reflecting off the chrome of the bumper in front of it. But when you hear about horned lizard reintroduction, that's to me, that's a positive thing, and that's 48 cents a copy to spread that around. They're just kind of less photogenic for some people, but that's an amazing. By the way, those are eye spots, but they don't work. Those are totally degenerative little. They're just little dots like oops. Okay, it gets more interesting. You're talking about the one I love. So, so discovered in 2005. Description's been underway for some time. This is amazing. Okay, so what do you know about this thing? Just look at the photo. It's preserved. We don't have any live ones. Andy's gonna get all excited now. There's that word up there, holotype. That's the only known specimen of this salamander. Okay, it's crazy looking salamander compared to those others. It's a wild looking thing. Look at the meat on its limbs and look at its 12-pack. And look at the size, the robustness of the head and the muscles, the jaw muscles on that thing compared to these guys.
Oh, wow.
Right? Look at those skinny arms, right? Pretty different. Now, these guys are the Schwarzeneggers of their environment. They totally are. All these little blind salamanders, great white sharks in their environment. The only thing they have to fear is one another. Oh, and they're wicked cannibals. And so game theory says if you're super long-lived, low reproducing, low chance of making it to adulthood organism, the smart strategy is eat every little dude you see. 252-year-old or a 19-year-old salamander or blindcat is infinitely more valuable to that population than any number of this year's mom that probably aren't going to make it. Think of deer farms. Okay, so exciting. Yeah, holotype collected in 1951 during the drought of record. There's a gravel washing operation on the banks of the Blanco River. They ran out of water, which is like part of the names for what they do. They need water to wash the gravel. And the crew noticed that there was a spring flowing from the bank or water flowing into a crack in the bed of the dry river. And so they had a team of workers. This is all more or less hearsay at this point, but it's like the tale of old Rip. I've heard it from. Anyways, they excavated this crevice that was basically a closed joint, 8 feet wide, 20 feet long, 20 feet deep. chasing water. Crystalline void, they had to whack it open and there's nice clean water at the bottom. Came back the next morning or after lunch, and there's several of these big, weird white salamanders in the bottom of the pool. So the foreman had the foresight to throw a few in a bucket. That's when they came back for lunch and found the heron ate all but one of them.
Oh.
All but two. One went to Texas State University where it was probably lost. The other one, eventually, after years of rolling around in someone's trunk, among other things, wound up safely deposited at the University of Texas. I've held this thing in my hand. It's no hoax. It's a crazy thing. It's Robusta is the species name. Yeah.
When they found it?
Yeah. 1951. That's what they got. Heron ate. Yeah. Heron ate.
Be a great blue heron.
And so this is actually an artist's rendition, who's to say they're wrong, of what the species might look like in life. No, I didn't commission this. Rewild, have you ever heard of Rewild? They used to be called Global Wildlife Conservation. Rewild has a lost species program where every year they provide a list of 10 lost species. And last year, I believe, this salamander was on their lost species list. And they got very excited about it. They actually put out a lot of material about it and really probably introduced this species to more people than I have in my entire career with that one fell swoop. And I think there's a children's book talking about it as well. So that's kind of cool. Oh, so I was talking about those old blind salamanders are like Schwarzenegger. Right, and so there's a Texas blind salamander, a big one on the left side of the right-hand photo, next to the type specimen of Eurystomus robusta. Robusta is a Wilt Chamberlain or an Andre the Giant in comparison. Now, Wilt and Andre and Arnold are all Homo sapiens. They're all the same species of human. We do not, there is no expert on Earth who thinks that Robusta is not a distinct species. In fact, you can go and look for free online 3D CT scans of the skeleton of it, Rapini and these others. You can see the dentition is different. They're totally different. My expectation is, and it seems pretty obvious, Robusta eats Rapini. Because there's nothing else in the aquifer big enough to justify Andre the Giant. So just a little map to reorient you. Number one up there, Barton Springs, that's Austin. That yellow triangle right there, that's Blanco River, where this that giant white blind Eurystomus robusta was discovered. By the way, that is my Moby Dick. That is my white whale. I've been chasing that thing forever. I got real close a few times. I got ghosted by the landowner who currently owns the discovery site. Once I had the geophysicist lined up to do subsurface tomography and the permits to drill the wells and all this good stuff. I've been super patient for a long time. We're still looking for opportunities to get back on the discovery site. And then the other little cluster, those are all Texas blind salamander sites. All the sites known for a Texas blind salamander are right within the San Marcos Pool, the aquifer. And then there's that new thing from New Braunfels. You can see we found several of those. So Satan, no genetic material. Robusta, no genetic material. That's unfortunate. And also there are no records of these. So Satan hasn't been seen since 1984. I mean, people don't look for these things. And Robusta hasn't been seen since 1951 for the same reasons. Yet last year, Fish and Wildlife Service responded to a petition from Center for Biological Diversity to list Eurystomus robusta and are in their 12-month review, and they declined to for two reasons. They said, well, either it's not a real species, so y'all are wrong. And not just me, like MacArthur Genius Award winners. Y'all are wrong. Or it's already extinct, which is not okay, right? Do y'all know what I'm referring to with this image? You got Schrodinger's cat, Schrodinger's cat, right? Put a cat in a box. You don't know if that cat is alive or dead until you open the box. So my criticism of Fish and Wildlife for punting on that was that they basically called the cat before they opened the box. They said, well, it's probably extinct, or maybe it wasn't a real thing. Like, you don't know that. I took a breath, and I see that as a respectful challenge for me to rediscover the species. So thank you, after 25 years of searching for it, to give me more motivation to find it. So the culmination of that whole story that I'm telling you is a project that I'm working on right now with Dean Hendrickson, who's a Curator of Fishes at UT-Austin. And we're using eDNA metabarcoding that Bessie alluded to earlier to survey for these super rare organisms. And we're also actually able to survey for all invertebrates. We were doing all bacteria too, but it's huge. The approach we're using, eDNA metabarcoding, just in a nutshell. So eDNA is environmental DNA. All living things shed DNA all the time. He's shedding, I'm shedding. Fish are shedding through their skin, salamanders through their skin and gills and all this. Everything's shedding all the time. You can collect that free-floating DNA. What we do is we take a few little liters of water, pass it through a super fine, like 0.8 micron filter, and that'll trap the DNA that we can precipitate off. My colleagues in laboratories, precipitate off. And then you can do one of two things. You can use primers that will target the DNA for that specific species. I want to know if Texas blind salamander is in here. I've designed DNA primers that will light up and amplify that species. Well, ooh. We don't have any for that. And we don't have any for that. So what's metabarcoding do? Metabarcoding looks at a common conserved region that's conserved across a huge group of living organisms. And using genetic archive databases like GenBank, and there are a whole bunch of other ones out there now where this stuff is available online. You can get genetic information for all sorts of stuff, whole genomes, you name it. You're basically referencing this one particular part of the genome to find a match, right? So that's that barcoding part. You got this little short stretch, and you're going to see whose barcode it matches up to. Well, in this case, it's never going to match up to anything perfectly because they're not in there. But we do, right? I showed you some slides earlier. We do know who their closest relatives are. So the blind cat, the blind cats here in San Antonio, well, we know what all the North American blind cats are and who our North American, who their surface relatives are as well. So if we find something that says, well, it's like a flathead, but it's not a flathead, it's probably Satan. If we find that it's like a Texas blind salamander, which we have really good sequence data for, but it's not a Texas blind salamander, we probably have Robusta. Now, I'm not going to say we have Robusta or we have Satan, but that's the first step. And then going and using traditional trapping or other sampling techniques. And there are actually ways where, and we're doing this on some other projects, once you get that DNA hit, you can then sequence that when you're doing direct DNA and see what that intervening code is. So why are we using this very expensive, complicated metabarcoding that involves sending samples to a company in the UK? It costs me about $250 a sample, not to mention shipping, is because we have no other option with the species there at the top of our list. And it doesn't matter if, for example, all the samples that we're collecting right now, we could be looking for invertebrates on them. And there are 20 odd federally listed aquifer invertebrates, but that is such a poorly represented group in any of these genetic databases that fortunately the samples and the sequence data from those samples, that stuff can be archived in perpetuity. And we're going to wait for the library to catch up with us. So my whole point, I only get so many more cubic feet of oxygen to consume in this life, is to try and get all that stuff collected now while I'm able, while I'm thinking about it. Let the next generation worry about it. And so really the biggest challenge has been, there's a bunch of things that happened, right? This all came about, I combined these two projects together and the pandemic hit. And we've, typical of zoos, we're always suffering with staffing shortages. And then also it's a very, very complex issue to sample these wells. So I'm going to run a little bit more quickly because it's mostly dots on the map. Basically just kind of showing you the distribution of the species that we've been talking about, and they're all kind of color coded. That Eurystomus salamanders is the whole group, not just the four that I've been talking about. And then we're looking at our project area, say we want to look for, everything from Eurystomus robusta down to the bottom end of where we think there would be blindcat habitat. And we're kind of bounding that and looking at the depth of wells and stuff. It starts to get crazy, right? Crazy number of wells. And it does, if you say, okay, well, let's just bound an area that encompasses all 8 known blindcat sites in San Antonio. Look, you see the Loop 410, all that, that's not a big area. Look how many wells there are there, right? There's way too many wells. And so we're never going to be able to sample all the wells. Hopefully we'll be able to sample a few of them. There are a ton of wells down there, but the wells that we really need access to are these big, deep wells. And those are things like Saw's wells. And they're very concerned about anything that might interfere with their ability to provide y'all with clean, reliable drinking water. I get it. And we recognize that, the fact that they've been pumping 24/7 for decades and decades and decades, that happened. That's going on now. It's going to happen to some degree in the future, although Saw's is really great about really trying to shift their dependency from the aquifer for a lot of good reasons to other sources. Those pumps are still going now. So Fish and Wildlife did a funny thing, right? They kind of kicked the can on the salamander, and then they did the right thing with the blindcats, and they said, look, all the data, and they did a very detailed study here. They wrote a report, they sent it out for expert review. They got the reviews back, and they started from scratch, and they wrote another report. And it was good. But it was a bit of a surprise, just given how molasses-like things move and how there's really sometimes you feel like there's a lack of will. That just last month, they proposed to list the 2 blindcats that live here in San Antonio. So normally that's really terrifying news, right? Landowners, for example, get terrified when they hear about another endangered species that might, interfere with my livelihood, etc. Truthfully, I do not feel like this is a threat to anyone, okay? Because first of all, Fish and Wildlife doesn't carry sticks in Texas, they carry little soft areas, both of their desks. So Fish and Wildlife is not going to come in and shut down Saws, right? Nothing like that. But there are a lot of things that we could do to increase our understanding of these species, also of their distribution. So just because they're only known from wells in a very small area, doesn't mean that's the only place that they exist. So if you saw the big purple blob of wells, we're sampling other areas that have the right sort of morphology, right depth, etc., right location, where we hope to find more, because every population we find extends the range, takes the pressure off that sort of pointless point management approach. And I also hope that this will be, with the blind salamander, that's a good example. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind, who knows, whatever. That's kind of what's been going on with these blindcats forever. Nobody's really felt like they needed to support research on this species. Now I hope that they will, that people will be motivated to learn more about it. I don't feel like it's a threat to anyone's way of life. But that's a huge education information issue. The void will get filled very, very quickly with misinformation. So each of you go home, talk to 10 neighbors. I'm about done. I want to thank a few people. The first bullet are, those are two private foundations, private foundations who, two private foundations and NGO who have funded this project to date. Also SAWS were even considering to let us sample their wells. Hopefully we'll have some fruitful conversations. Also NGO partners, Edwards Aquifer Alliance, Fish and Wildlife has been great. Park Service, obviously. Zara Environmental, Jean was the person who took me on my first blindcat hunting trips. We were grad students together. She and Peter founded this company. I was their first employee. So we go back a lot, and now they work for me sometimes. So we go back a long ways, and they're great. Dean Hendrickson, who I stole a lot of these slides from. Nicholas Kaufman is an engineer who's helped us with this. How do you figure out who owns a well now, right? If it's drilled in 1940. He had done a lot of work with the oil industry and wanted to throw some of his energy at something worthwhile. And so he helped us with developing a database that aligns current county tax records with the Texas Water Development Board's wells database. So we have current well owners. That's great. That's part of the challenge. The other part of the challenge is getting permission from those landowners. So one of the reasons why Rarest Edwards Aquifer Alliance and the San Marcos River Foundation, somehow I cut their last name off there, and hopefully Bear Audubon, and definitely the Bear chapter of the Sierra Club, and a few others will share our list of well owners with their membership officers and indicate where they might recognize a name from their list of friendlies who might know, might own one of those wells, especially here in San Antonio, where a lot of families have been here for a long time. There could be a member of this club who could help us unlock one of these wells. So lots of thanks there. Finally, art and media, just a couple of quick things. If you're ever in Del Rio, Texas, I highly recommend it. Go downtown to the nice part of town, and they have a beautiful mural of the Mexican blindcat. So this was done as part of a project. The Center for Biological Diversity hired muralists to travel around the country and draw large public murals of endangered species found around those communities. And I don't know who came up with Del Rio, and I don't know who picked the blindcat, but it's super awesome. And let me tell you, 3 years ago, nobody in Del Rio knew what you're talking about if you talked about blindcats. And now they all know about the big pink boy mural. No, I'm kidding. No, but they're excited about their blanket. They're excited about their blindcats. I had the great fortune of doing a Fish of the Week, or Dean did a Fish of the Week podcast on that. I actually did a Fish of the Week podcast on the Mexican tetra. If you saw Deep in the Heart of the Texas Wildlife Story, you see a blindcat in there. That's Ray Charles. He's one of our family. So all that was shot at the zoo. Yeah. Ben Masters is a genius. And then also Rewild, I mentioned, they put the Eurystomus robust on their search for lost species list. And last but not least, Lisa Johansson and Bianca Santillan. This is two school teachers. One is writing her first children's book, and the other is illustrating her first children's book. It's super awesome, and it's about a Mexican blindcat who gets swept underground, or a tadpole gets swept underground, meets a blindcat who guides him through the aquifer to a different pool. Might be on the other side of the river, who knows? But really, really great, stunning illustrations in this book. And I'll just say the story was vetted and reviewed by the world's greatest all of the world's living blindcat experts. Like 3, 4 people. Sorry, I've gone on too long. Just on our side, just showing a little bit of the diversity that we've been doing in Mexico, because it's really boring up here, right? You've all seen the AT&T complex. What am I going to show you? That blindcat right there. I actually I crawled in that little box. That's in the middle of an arroyo, and it had like mucky green water and some frogs and about this much airspace going that way. And so I had to put mask and snorkel on, so my snorkel was on the ceiling, and I crawled in there about 4 body lengths, and I found blindcats, which was a horrible experience because now I can't pass up any of these little growth holes because it might have blindcats in it. And you can see those 2 posing there with, it looks like they're going to go climb Everest. It's actually quite the opposite. And a cat right there, the woman perched above the pool, she's collecting environmental DNA samples. So thanks for listening to me ramble.
Who knew?
I don't know.
Wow, anybody here have a question?
I get the eDNA results. Looking at years.
No, I get that question from so many people, but they're usually the people that give me money.
Knock it up, kid.
I have about 30 kids, and they're all ready to be deployed. I just got a email from the company in the UK saying, you've been selling those kits for a while, the preservatives got bad. We need to sell you more. I'm like, preservative goes bad.
It's not very good.
But that's fine because we're a little bit of a pause while we're lining up access. So with the requirement for us to be able to ship the samples internationally, and then also for our permits, is to have, and just a good darn rule, is to have written landowner permission. And so we're going about it systematically and approaching members, individual well owners who have been cross-referenced as being members of the NGOs that I mentioned. We're going to start with sort of a friendly list because, frankly, look at the number of wells. I can't afford to, put postcards in every mailbox. That was floated at one point. I'm like, no, you guys don't get it, right? You can't junk mail people out.
Away anyway. Okay.
Soon, I hope.
Soon.
Yeah.
We have a question on the chat. How much of a threat is fracking to these fish and salamanders?
Good question. So,
Would you repeat the question so people could?
how much of a threat is fracking to these fish and salamanders? So the salamanders, the group of aquifer adapted salamanders I've talked about don't exist where there's any oil extraction or fracking at all. I mean, still, a tanker truck spill at the wrong spot could contaminate the aquifer and basically, all the entire known range of the species. As far as the blindcats go, there is a lot of oil and gas going on both sides of the border. It's difficult to say. Part of that region has a lot of coal activity as well. I'm not sure that has. We just don't know what effect fracking may have had on this part of the aquifer. I mean, I can't imagine that it's been beneficial. Another interesting thing, I mentioned we still don't know a whole lot about that part of that aquifer, but then other ones, have you heard recently in the Eagle Pass, they discovered a very, very deep thermal aquifer? It's got tremendous volumes of flow, and it's geothermal, and no one ever knew it was there. So, who knows what that's going to bring. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and have you heard of Woot Cave that was just discovered and the salamander the new salamander that was discovered in there?
Which cave?
The Woot. It was just discovered in August of 22.
Woot.
Woot, WOOT.
'Where's that at?
Between Hondo and Tarpley. Yeah, real close.
Well, there is a, so, there are three new species of Eurystomus being described currently. So that may be one of them, but that may be this Gillespie County species. That sounds right.
They said when they found it that I don't know who, but that it's never been found anywhere else before.
I'd love to learn more about that. So I'm a member of I'm actually the editor for that Texas Speleological Survey. If you don't know about, it's a completely volunteer nonprofit, and we maintain all cave and karst information in Texas for the benefit of cave owners and cavers.
Well, you're aware Bear Grotto knows is the one doing it.
Oh, okay, I'll talk to those guys.
Awesome. That's a good connection,
Yeah. It's
Thank you,
all the
Jim.
cavers are one big thing.
right? Any other questions in the chat? You have time for
Curious
just,
why no cave salamanders or catfish have never been discovered in the hill country of Medina and Valley County.
There are plenty of salamanders. They're curious why no cave salamanders or blind catfish have been found in the hill country of Medina and Uvalde. Eurystomus salamanders are actually pretty common in those counties, and particularly in like the little Mesic canyons, spring-fed Mesic canyons. You can count on them. They're almost ubiquitous.
Why are the catfish successful underground but not other types of fish? You said that they were washed down there and then they survived. Why catfish, not other certain?
I had that one down pat because, catfish. I mean, they're nocturnal. They got whiskers. They got small eyes. They tend to. A lot of catfish species you find in water
Bottom dweller.
no visibility in the middle of the day.
Right.
So you think, well, they're kind of predisposed for this. But then I was talking to you about the Mexican tetra, the Mexican cavefish, and
Yeah.
I mean that is a strictly surface loving fish. So one would think. They love the twilight zone. They love to seek refuge and just inside of spring mouths. They like to be able to dart between the sun, the shade. So you actually, with that surface fish, you have something that really likes to use shade and shadows when it's available, and where the water coming out of spring is constant temperature year round. So when you have tropical fish or subtropical fish introduced into a temperate climate, the only places are going to bring that river. Why catfish? I think I'm on to something with that catfish by and large are predisposed, but then you look around the world, there aren't as many species of cave catfish as you might think. There are lots of other cave adapted fish, loaches in particular, barbs, right? So in China, another place that we work on cave fish, there are over 137 described species of cave fish. And the last 4 trips I made there, we discovered new species every time. Incredibly diverse. Why does China have so many more? South China have so many more species. Well, their karst areas the size of Texas, like all of this karst is South China, and it's South China. It's this tropical climate. It's warm. It's got really high rainfall, and they had a great fish diversity to begin with, and really stable conditions. So, but we do have several other groups of fish in North America that have colonized caves. Just for some reason, you would expect it to be catfish at every turn, and they're absent more often than you'd expect.
it's not just catfish.
Yeah, not just catfish.
They just get all the PR at their own.
They're pretty awesome.
Well, thank you so much. This
Thank
has
you.
been, we keep, the comments are coming up, who knew all this stuff? I mean, don't you go away tonight saying, I never knew about that, but now we can spread the word. You can say, those little pink things down below us are pretty cool. And that's
There's
really,
bragging rights, though. there's
Not
bragging rights.
rights.
So, yeah, I mean, let's all tap into our sense of Texas nationalism. And especially San Antonio pride. We have these species here. They don't have them in Waco. They don't have anything like this stuff in New Mexico or Louisiana. Forget about it. Dallas doesn't have blind cats or blind salamanders. Like, this is cool. This is
Well,
cool.
we have a saying in Texas, it's not bragging if it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Well, thank you so much,
Thank you.
and I wish we could give you a million dollars.
Right? It's in the memo, blind cats, or whatever you guys want to donate it to, but if you don't write it in the memo, I don't know where.
I'll be sure you
And-
get
and
it.
Patsy brought
Hand
the-
him the check personally.
Patsy brought up a really good point. I'm gonna steal more time. So the project I talked to you about today, the horned lizard project that she mentioned, she showed you a photo of the turtle work that we're doing, all the Mexican cavefish work we're doing. 100% supported by grants and donations, big ones, little ones, the whole gamut. So if you guys like what we're doing and you want to support it, you can go to the zoo's website, click on conservation. You can read about the various projects. We're shamelessly splattered with donate buttons on them. I really encourage you guys to think
You
about.
can get bumper stickers.
Oh, yeah,
things
yeah.
like that.
Someone just wrote the chat, we need
But-
salamander bumper stickers.
Salamander.
Consider the fact that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, so there are tax benefits to make a sizable donation to our
And
efforts.
they'll invite you over to see baby.
Baby
horned
whatever.
lizards, everything like that.
So baby horned lizards are available for a limited time because we're having our first release on October 4th and our second one on October 18th. So
And he's tired of talking about them, but
we're tired of
there's
it.
a whole new subject, and it's just, it's
Yeah.
fascinating the way they're tracking them and all that, but we can't get into that tonight. But we want to thank you, and we want to thank all of you for coming, and all the people that are online. Thank you very much. They've just glued to the Zoom.